Yeah, exactly. And I help with the litigation as well, and help with the lobbying efforts. But really, yeah, I see myself as a voice for these places, as a storyteller. Yeah, and just as a force helping convey to people what's really at stake.
And tell us a little bit more about, or tell me a little bit more about what you actually are doing. So you're going to the border in different places and you're recording the process of construction, right? From what I understand. What are you? Are you talking to people? What's your MO?
Yeah, so I mean, a big part of my job is coordinating this national resistance effort against border walls and militarization across the borderlands, especially before this year when wall construction in Arizona really picked up. I was spending months out of the year in South Texas working with communities there, helping them organize forums and protests and educate the public about the dangers of wall construction. Now that DHS has broken ground in Arizona, and they're building literally hundreds of miles of wall as we speak through Arizona, California, and New Mexico. The job really has become one of almost investigative journalism out there, trying to get documentation and photos and videos of what's being destroyed, and yeah, just basically creating this media campaign in order to make people aware of what's happening. And that also involves coordinating folks in all of these different states, organizing big protests and demonstrations. We had a massive action. 1,000 people turned out to protest the wall being built across the San Pedro River in Cochise County. And if you know Arizona, you know Cochise is one of the most conservative counties in Arizona. So we were really pleased, really excited to have 1,000 Cochise County residents come out to that protest. We also organized big demonstrations at Organ Pipe with a large Dawn Autumn presence. It's really hard right now because we would be doing more of that, but we're not allowed to gather in large crowds. So I think in a lot of ways, the pandemic has really neutered our efforts to organize and fight back against wall construction, even while the construction itself has been accelerating during this pandemic.
So that form of social organization and proximity is somehow wavered in all of this.
Yeah, there are well over 1,000 construction workers across the border living in close quarters, working in wall construction. These workers go into border communities to shop. They're often staying in hotels. Places like Douglas and Ajo are now exposed to a huge amount of risk of the transmission of COVID-19. And there have been a lot of community residents, public health experts who have been speaking out against this. We've been demanding that Trump halt wall construction and use all of these resources to fight the spread of COVID. But of course, I think authoritarians like Trump always use these moments of crisis to advance their own wish lists and their own darkest agendas. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now with wall construction, with handouts to the oil and gas industry, with the suspension of environmental regulations. A lot is being pushed through while we're all locked in our living rooms.
Yeah, I get that sense too. Certainly, just reading headlines and talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
So, could you take us on a little, walk along the border and sort of talk about the different places that are being affected by construction right now? You said so there are 1,000 or more workers in different places on the border, and they're actively putting up these, in some places, these 30 feet tall bollard fences that are pretty incredible to see.
That's the design across the board.
It is okay. Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah. So basically, it's this. Trump's very proud to call it American-made steel, 6-inch by 6-inch in diameter bollards that are welded together. Depending on the contractor, there might be a 2, 3, or 4-inch gap in between these bollards, and that's the tiny gap that wildlife can slip through. So, in terms of wildlife migration, these walls will stop the migration of all animals larger than a pocket mouse or maybe a small jackrabbit. We've made repeated pleas to Border Patrol asking them to widen the distance between these bollards because, a human can't pass through a 5 or even 6-inch gap, but they have completely refused. So, yeah, like I mentioned, construction's really been accelerating since the pandemic struck. In the last month, the Trump administration has announced almost 200 miles of new wall construction. And essentially what we're seeing now is if Trump gets his way by Election Day, there will be a solid wall from San Diego all the way to El Paso, save a couple really erosive volcanic areas in Cabeza Prieta. I think at some point in the last year, Trump realized that if he doesn't pull out all the stops and make sure this wall is built, he won't be able to say he delivered on his biggest election promise. Mm-hmm. So, it's the borderlands as a whole are all under threat, all under attack. And I think, mm-hmm. In Arizona, the areas that we're the most concerned about are Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, the Cabeza Prieta Wildlife Refuge, and the San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge, which is this mm-hmm. incredible place in the eastern Arizona borderlands. There are 8 endangered species, 4 of which are freshwater fish that don't live anywhere else in the country. There's also Chiricahua leopard frogs there, which are protected by the Endangered Species Act. And all of these species congregate around this really small amount of natural fresh water. There's these incredible cienagas, these little pools of clear, flowing blue water that provide habitat for these species. And right now, Border Patrol is sucking up, by some accounts, as much as 700,000 gallons of groundwater every day from a well just outside of this wildlife refuge. So we are deeply, deeply concerned that these aquatic habitats could be wiped off the face of the map. And along with them, we would lose at least 4 endemic species of fish that don't live anywhere else in the country.
It's an interesting thing that, in the areas that these massive pieces of infrastructure are going up happen to be some of the most biodiverse parts of the Southwest and northern Mexico, especially the area that you're talking about around, southeastern Arizona, all those kind of corridors that link, the Continental Divide, basically, that link, the Rockies with the Sierra Madre Occidental in Mexico. It's an astonishing sort of truncation of that, wildlife and human, of course, in some ways, but of that movement across these, what are really regions.
It is,
actually connected regions.
And particularly there in Southeast Arizona and New Mexico. I mean, it's this collision of worlds. You have mountain ranges where jaguars and black bears roam on the same slopes. All of this incredible biodiversity is because you have these tropical influences creeping up from the Sierra Madre, incredible plant diversity. And this is also the area where the crucial corridors for jaguars are. The breeding population of jaguars is about 150 miles south of the border in Sonora, and individual cats have been coming up into Arizona, into New Mexico, through these mountainous corridors that are now slated for wall construction. So if these walls are built, that will be the end of jaguar recovery in the United States.
Incredible. Wow. I've noticed that, so I traipsed around different parts of the border in the San Pedro riparian corridor area and around that space. I've noticed that, previous wall construction includes these kind of retractable gates that allow floodwaters and wildlife to pass through. And that was, I think stuff that was probably built during the first big push under the Bush, I think in the Bush administration. To me, those look like they were there's, in a way, a kind of a nod toward or some small concessions made to some of the concerns that you're talking about. Is that happening anywhere in any of this, in this current push to build fences and walls?
Despite the repeated pleas from conservationists, from border ranchers, from borderlands residents, the Trump administration's been unwilling to make a single concession or a single deviation in the path of the wall.
Amazing.
Some of those gates that you talk about, my understanding is that those are built by necessity. If those weren't there and the monsoonal rains came, that would actually push the entire wall over, which has happened a couple different times.
I could see that.
Yeah. So, the Trump administration is installing these floodgates in arroyos and drainages. I don't think they understand what it really looks like when it monsoons here, because some of these gates are these tiny little openings in pretty big arroyos that get massive seasonal floods. We'll get 2 inches of rain in one day here in the monsoons. And sometimes that's the majority of our annual rainfall all comes in a couple days.
Right.
And I fully expect that we will see chunks of Trump's wall coming down this summer when the monsoons come.
Because of that, for that very reason. Yeah, I mean, the thing, I did definitely notice that if you had some debris that were to get lodged in front of those openings, which surely would happen, it wouldn't take much to clog them up, and then you'd have a major kind of flood on the other side of the, either side of the the wall.
Of course, yeah. And I mean, that just gets at the absurdity of this structure. Trying to build this massive landscape scale linear wall across the thousands of arroyos and washes in our state. It's as absurd as it sounds. And the wall itself defies the landscape. So I think, we can only expect that nature bats last. And I think a lot of this wall will come tumbling down. I often think about what's it going to look like in 10 and 15 years when the political will to maintain these structures has diminished. Are we going to see chunks of these walls toppling over into Mexico, into the United States? I'm so curious because there's a massive amount of money that we're going to have to spend maintaining this structure. And I just don't see how after Trump is gone, there's going to be the will to maintain this really vile legacy that he's left his mark through the borderlands.
No, I agree. I mean, I think that the other side of it, or part of it, as you noted earlier too, is that, this is a wave or a trajectory that this country has been on for some time too. This kind of like extreme militarization of the border. I mean, definitely since the early 1990s and, policies to push people into the desert. What is it? Deterrence or prevention through deterrence, right?
Yeah.
That whole policy that we seem to be so enamored of. And really, I mean, it's like, as you said too, it's really there just for administrations and politicians to be able to point to the fact that they're doing something, and that wall comes to embody or to symbolize everything that they hope to do, which is to say, you all are shut out. This is on the other side of this wall is not who we are.
Exactly. Well,
you're the other.
Yeah, it's this beautifully simple tool that politicians can use to illustrate their entire worldview. 3 words: build the wall. That encapsulates Trump's entire foreign policy platform. And I think it's just so appealing to most Americans to take this really complicated and nuanced idea, this region that is so full of different stories and different realities, simplify it into a 3-word equation, and then sell that. And what Trump has done is he's sold off the borderlands like so many other politicians have done in order to win elections. And I think we need to focus on reclaiming that narrative. And as hard as it is to infusing this discussion with the nuance that it deserves.
Yeah, right. I know that's the thing too. It's like you're up against the forces of kind of essentialization, that you can just point to this this object that's supposed to be out there and just say, okay, it's taken care of. When on different sides of this argument, then we have the problem of, like you're saying, taking all this information, all the subtleties, and trying to educate people about the way this region has in effect become kind of sacrificial, in the eyes of, or in the broader processes of American politics.
Yep, and that's hard to synthesize into talking points.
So hard to synthesize into talking points. I mean, I have friends and relatives from that I've known for years who are all in favor of fortification of the border, thinking that this is going to do the trick. I mean, I grew up in San Diego County, basically right on the border, in the midst of really tense border dynamics, and in the midst of some very strident racist arguments about the border. And that's kind of what I knew as a kid. That's what I grew up in. And it wasn't really until I came to Arizona and my sort of trajectory changed a little bit that I started to become much more aware of what's happening. So I'm just thinking like how hard I understand how difficult it is to get this message out and to have it actually gain some traction when you're up against some very well-moneyed opponents, who want to see this all go through. But I don't know. I was also kind of wondering though, as we're talking about all of this, so we have Southern Arizona and we've got New Mexico. What are they actually planning to take this all the way through, say, Big Bend and places like that, or what's the?
Yeah,
just like you're.
So
yeah, go ahead.
As far as we understand right now, we've heard no proposals to wall off Big Bend or anywhere in the Big Bend Border Patrol sector, which would just be absurd. They have about 300 apprehensions annually in that entire region there. So it would just make no tactical sense, even from their own metrics. But we are expecting to see all of South Texas's Rio Grande Valley walled off, basically from the Gulf of Mexico to 150 miles inland, about 55 miles around the border city of Laredo. And then all of the New Mexico boot heel, which is pristine, incredible wilderness land. These wonderful grasslands full of antelope. There's actually a native herd of bison in that area that still crosses the border from time to time.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're called the Janos bison. Really incredible. I believe they are mostly genetically pure. And then a couple other areas in Texas. Now, of course, this is a really ambitious goal that the Trump administration has set. But when you realize that none of the normal laws apply, that they have the power to grant these multi-billion-dollar contracts with no oversight and no congressional review, and that they have a potentially infinite workforce of construction workers, a lot of which actually come up from Mexico to help build the wall. This pie in the sky idea all of a sudden becomes a terrifying prospect that could actually happen this year. We're doing everything we can to stop this project, and that includes continuing our legal battles. That will include massive in-person demonstrations, but we're trying to stop the most powerful man in the world's number one priority. We're up against a lot here.
No doubt. I feel like the groundwork for this vision, has been laid in place for a long time. So it's an easy thing for somebody in the political world to pick that up and just run with it and say, well, okay, so we have 600 miles of border fence and wall, and we're gonna shoot for the other what is it, 1,400 or something like that. It's absurd. The whole thing is so absurd.
It truly is. I mean, I would kill to be a fly on the wall in one of the presidential briefings about the border wall and what areas they're building in, and just the way that they have to simplify this issue in order to fit it into a briefing. It just does such a massive disservice to this incredible region that you and I love so much.
Do you have people in the political sphere coming to you? I mean, I would imagine people from Raul Grijalva's office and other areas like that. Are they talking to you and asking you for information, or what's the relationship there?
Yeah, we have a really close relationship with most border members of Congress. We consistently feed them information. I've taken a number of their staff on border tours, which is the single best thing I can do, because these landscapes speak for themselves, right? If you immerse a staffer in the beauty of Coronado National Memorial or the San Pedro River, they're going to be compelled to fight for that place for decades to come. So lots of personal site visits. We've helped them organize hearings and briefings. And of course, we've helped them work on legislation and letters, most specifically, or most recently, a letter calling for a halt of all wall construction until the pandemic subsides. So we have some incredible congressional leadership here in Southern Arizona. Obviously, it's not enough to stop projects like these. So we're gonna continue fighting in that arena as well.
Yeah, it's important nonetheless. I hear what you're saying. I mean, it's not enough to stop the incredible momentum they have, but like you said earlier as well, we do have to. It seems so important to be bearing witness to this moment, to what's happening in this time. And I was actually. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're creating the historical record right now. Like everything we do now is creating the record that people will look back on in order to justify tearing these walls down. So I think the work is so important. Right.
It's a little bit like dam breaching. This idea that for so long was the dominant paradigm, and in many countries and places it still is. Probably in many ways in this country as well. But I think we've arrived at a point in which it's not so absurd to thinking about taking down a dam.
Absolutely.
and that's amazing. That's a big turn of consciousness.
And I mean,
that is marked by that.
One of the most inspiring things as we've watched these massive dams come tumbling down is just how fast the rivers regenerate, just how fast these ecosystems return to some semblance of a natural balance. I can only hope the same will occur here in the borderlands when we tear the wall down.
Yeah, here. So as we're kind of, I think we're probably pretty close to ending here, but I was going to ask you, do you have, how can people get involved, get behind efforts like the centers and others?
Yeah, absolutely. If folks want to follow along with my work, I do a lot of media work, a lot of reporting from these areas. They can follow me on Twitter, which I post on basically every day. We also post opportunities to take action, to weigh in on these projects. I'll post that on my Twitter. And if folks want to read more about the Center's campaign, our webpage is just nowall.org. And that's got a lot more information on how people can get involved and help contribute to this fight.
And is there anything you want to add to the conversation here? Anything you would like to talk about that I haven't asked you about? This is such an interesting topic.
God, we could riff for hours, but I think we've covered a lot of what's important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess I just want to reiterate the importance of not turning away from this. I know this is a really difficult issue to look at. It's heartbreaking. It's painful to see what's happening on the border, both with people, with migrants, and with the destruction of these environments. But we have to keep spotlighting these issues. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to brush them in the dustbin of history. I implore everyone to just continue this difficult job of bearing witness. And I hope we can all celebrate soon as we get to work turning the walls down.
Well, Laiken, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, no, it's been so great to reconnect and really excited to collaborate in the future with you, Jeff.
Since we recorded this interview, Mr. Jordahl has confirmed with us that there are actually 4,000 contractors working on the wall and not just 1,000 as he had originally said. This information comes from the United States Army.